Do you struggle to answer detailed questions from executives around various investment portfolio scenarios? Does it take a long time to analyze data to answer these types of questions? What could we get for 5% more budget? Is 80% of our budget really mandatory? Are we sure we can do all of the projects we've selected? UMS Group's Spend Optimization Suite, a portfolio optimization decision support application, supports collection of the relevant information and easy analysis to quickly respond to these types of questions or solve these types of problems. For each of these three questions, let's explore how the SOS can help. First, what can we achieve for a 5% budget increase? Let's take a look at the portfolio results at the original budget level. Here, we see the value achieved and the value that was left on the table or that was not selected in the given scenario in a relative view. In a normalized view, we see again that the greatest amount of value we couldn't achieve within our constraints was related to reliability. We can look at our risk matrix to see what unfunded projects we have above our acceptable tolerance and trace these back to the library for further analysis or manual forcing. We can also look at an efficient frontier view, illustrating the point at which the increase in costs starts to exceed the increase in value. The dotted line shows us a guideline for an optimal budget level calculated as this point where cost starts increasing faster than value plus mandatory investments plus any additional high-risk investments. According to this guideline, our budget level is less than optimal. So let's rerun our analysis with a 5% budget increase closer to our optimal budget level guideline to understand what we can achieve for that increase. A comparison of the reports and charts shows us that we can achieve 8% more value overall, from 90% to 98%, with the biggest increase in reliability, and the data indicates this could translate to a system improvement of 0.15 in safety, or 12.5%. Additional risk has been mitigated such that there are no longer any deferred investments above the acceptable risk threshold. The optimization outputs easily create a clear, concise, data-supported story to answer questions, making a case for additional funding or communicate the trade-offs and exposure of lesser funding. Second, let's see how the SOS can help better understand and control mandatory spend. Investments are often marked mandatory when they may not be fully mandatory or not mandatory until a future date. This can result in very high percentages of the budget, or even the whole budget, being mandatory, with little room for discretionary spending to help achieve company strategy. In this case, what can we do? We can tighten the definitions to make sure investments don't fit within a mandatory classification unless they truly meet the intent of the category. Another option is to split investments into their mandatory and non-mandatory pieces when applicable. This can be done easily by copying and tweaking data and tying the pieces together with dependency relationships. In some cases, this can drastically reduce mandatory amounts. It's also easy to perform analysis with various levels of mandatory forced. The default is all categories forced. At the opposite end of the spectrum, it can be interesting to see the results with no mandatory categories forced to see how much value and risk mitigation the mandatory is costing. In between these bookends, a political or board-directed category could be turned off, reflecting a more realistic scenario, as there's often some flexibility with projects in these types of categories. The comparison of additional value achieved and risk mitigated with reduced mandatory amounts can provide a powerful story. This can drive politicians or executives to reconsider mandatory designations, or at least provide a complete understanding of mandatory decision impacts. Last, let's briefly look at resource constraints. How can the SOS help ensure you'll actually be able to do all the projects approved for funding and meet contractor agreements? Internally, there are often certain types of resources which are highly constrained, such as IT resources. And externally, we may have minimum requirements with contractors. On an investment level, the SOS provides for collecting annual resource requirements across an unlimited number of resource types. Then, during optimization, this resource data can be used in setting maximum constraints. For example, we have limited IT time, or minimum constraints, such as we need a certain amount of contractor labor to meet our agreements. A summary of the optimization results shows us what resource levels we achieved and the associated value and risk mitigation of the portfolio. From there, we could increase our constrained resources to demonstrate what we could do with one or more additional FTEs within the same budget constraint. We might also want to play with the resource types with minimal contractual obligations to see if adjusting our contracts might allow us to achieve a better portfolio, if that's a realistic possibility. These are just a few of the tough questions that can be answered using the analysis and outputs of UMS Group's Spend Optimization Suite, or SOS, for making investment planning decisions. Find out more